Hello, this is Freethought Forum, a program of the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalist of East Tennessee. I'm Carl.
And I'm Ralph Eisler. We want you to know that if you don't believe in God, you're not alone. Right here in East Tennessee, you can find free-thinking atheists, agnostics, and other types of free-thinking people. This is a show for them and for people committed to a life rooted in science and free of supernatural beliefs.
On today's show, we'll be interviewing Dan Barker, co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Very interesting and talented person.
Yes, so you sure want to stick with us all through the show, I think. Anyhow, we want to tell you a little about the sponsors of our show. The Atheist Society of Knoxville frequently has a fun meetup at a bar or eatery. Tonight's meetup is at Barley's in the Old City, starting around 5:30. Look for the silver-jacketed copy of The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. And as Matt Dillahunty from the Atheist Experience says, everyone's welcome to our happy hour for food, drink, conversation. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't.
The Rationalists of East Tennessee have several regular monthly meetings. We have a first and third Sunday meeting, which is usually a talk and discussion. On the second Sunday, we have the Rationalists of East Tennessee Skeptics Book Club. And on the fourth Sunday, we have some different things. About every other month, we have a meeting called Reflections, which is a potluck at someone's home with a discussion topic. And sometimes we have other activities, games, hikes, and parties.
Yeah. So later in the show, we'll give you our websites to visit for additional details, including times and locations of our meetings. But right now, we're just going to look into some things that were in the news recently.
Not necessarily good things.
Not necessarily good things. News doesn't have to be good. There's good news and bad news, okay? They usually go together. Law of unintended consequences often comes in there, too. As most of you know, the Bible as the state book of Tennessee was vetoed by Governor Haslam and not overridden by the legislature. So this would have been a clear violation of church and state if the legislature had voted it in, and it would have occasioned lawsuits, certainly, from many organizations, perhaps the ACLU, perhaps Freedom from Religion Foundation, where we're going to interview its president and co-president today, Dan Barker. But when you actually start looking at what's in the Bible, it's going to turn most people off. I mean, there's a lot of mayhem, genocide, rape, murder, slavery, because it something that was written out of tribal societies. And that still persists today in many places in the world, but hopefully we're past that stage in the U.S. I'm not sure that we're completely past it, but maybe we are. And there was a canard about it, too, that the person who proposed the bill said it was just as a historical document. But the first story in the paper about it pointed out that there was an outside group that was willing to defend any sort of lawsuits pro bono if they came up. Now, I can't imagine an outside law group wanting to defend some sort of a cultural icon for the state of Tennessee. And for instance, our state vegetable is the tomato. Suppose that it had not passed. Would any outside group be interested in defending that in court? No.
Perhaps the state gun, the sniper rifle.
State gun. Yeah, we got a new state gun, though.
I'm sure if Dan's listening in there that the attorneys there were watching that. They keep track of most everything that's going on in all the states of church-state separation violations.
Yeah.
And another thing in the news is the new book by evangelical Christian author Larry Alex Taunton claims that Christopher Hitchens came back to religion when he was near death, saying, quote, "At the end of his life, Christopher's searches had brought him willingly, if secretly, to the altar. Precisely what he did there, no one knows." That's pretty widely disputed. I mean, Darwin and Ingersoll also had these alleged deathbed conversions. But in Hitchens' own words, quote, I challenge you to find one good or noble thing which cannot be accomplished without religion. It is impossible. You cannot do it. So, again, people try to force religion on those even after death. It's easier then, I suppose.
Yeah, well, we have a regular caller who has, from time to time, told us that Darwin actually recanted on his deathbed to the Lady Hope, which is nonsense. I mean, Darwin's daughter disavowed that. So, and of course, Ken Ham is asking Target, the store, Target now, to read God's Word about bathrooms.
And the New American Family Association has joined him, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, Ken is Ken has had some recent writings about the Freedom from Religion Foundation on his blog. He says he writes that the Freedom from Religion Foundation is attempting to remove Christianity from the public sphere, such as the recent case in Colorado, or to stop allowing Bibles to be distributed to students, or they were going to be forced to allow satanic material to be handed out as well. So the FFRF, if you don't know it, is one of the leading, I will say atheist or agnostic, but free thinker organizations in the country, and dedicated strongly to the separation of church and state.
They also have the largest membership of any of the groups, last I heard. I think what's going on here, and since Dan's, I can hear him in the background there, with our interview with Dan Barker. He's a former evangelical preacher, co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, author of many books, jazz musician, free thought songwriter, a great debater, over 110 public debates, and basically just a really nice guy. I've met him a few times briefly, and he's just friendly as can be, and also pretty smart. So, Dan, can you hear us now?
I'm here. Hi. Good to talk to you guys.
I thought I'd let you tell a little bit about the Freedom from Religion Foundation, but I wanted to play a little, one of your versions, musical versions, real quick before you got into the actual verbal description. So I'm going to play that real quick FFRF song for us.
We are humanists, materialists, and a few utilitarians, rationalists, naturalists, some octogenarians, infidels, heathens, transcendentalists, and realists, disbelievers, secularists, universalists, and hedonists, positivists, determinists, and several unitarians, separationists, empiricists, and latitudinarians, atheists, agnostics, nihilists, and theists, free thinkers, skeptics, existentialists, and deists. Though we call ourselves by many an intellectual appellation, we are harmoniously the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
All right, you want to follow up on that?
That was fun to hear. I haven't heard that for a long time.
So would you like to do a little brief description of the Freedom from Religion Foundation?
Yeah, that song was written by Ruth Hermance Green. She's the woman from Missouri who wrote the book, The Born Again Skeptic's Guide to the Bible. And I never met her. She died a couple years before I came along in the foundation. But and we've grown a lot. In her time, there were about 500 members. Now there's about 24,000.
Wow.
We are a national organization. We're based in Madison, Wisconsin. And we work to keep religion and government separate. And we work to educate the public about the views of non-believers, whatever we call ourselves. And Ruth's really funny song has about, 20 different appellations, atheist, agnostic, secular humanist. As you said earlier, we like to use the word free thought or free thinker because that's kind of like an umbrella term that encompasses all sorts of skeptical, non-believing positions. The joke around here is that we don't care what we call ourselves. We all disbelieve in the same God. So you're right. We have we're watching all over the country, especially there in Tennessee. For some reason, we get a lot of complaints out of Tennessee. We have 5 full-time attorneys plus 2 full-time attorneys who are on a fellowship. So that's 7 attorneys right now. And we actually wrote a letter to the state of Tennessee when that bill passed. What did it pass? The Senate, right? And when it was finally sent to the governor's desk, we wrote a letter pointing out a lot of the things that you just said as well, urging the governor not to sign that bill. And of course, the governor made a very eloquent statement when he decided to veto the bill. And the governor likes the Bible and thinks the Bible is a beautiful book, but that it would cheapen the Bible to turn it into something like the state tomato, So that was a good way for him to turn it down. And of course, fortunately, not an answer to our prayers because we don't pray, but fortunately, the veto was not overridden. So we sued the government at all levels. We would have sued on this. Actually, we would have been ready. We would have only needed to find somebody like you, Carl, or
I would have been
Lee,
there.
the other person.
I'm sure a lot of people. A lot of
Or
people-
Alita. I'm sure Alita would join us, to become plaintiffs challenging such a really bad, unconstitutional state law.
All right, let me ask you a question. Is
And,
there some limit on the number of plaintiffs you can have?
No.
Well,
No, there's not.
I would guarantee there's been a lot.
Well, there's not a limit, but
Yeah, practically, yeah.
we would probably only take. We've had cases where we had more than 20 plaintiffs.
Wow.
Like in this case we just won in California over the praying school board, we had more than 20. And at Ten Commandments Monument in Wisconsin, we had more than 20 plaintiffs. But really, you only need one good
Yeah.
plaintiff. But if you have 4, 5, 6, 8, or 10 good plaintiffs, then that makes it less likely that the other side is going to knock you out on standing, that perhaps one of your plaintiffs doesn't have the proper standing to take the case.
Oh.
Yeah, we would have gone to court, and I'm sure we would have found 5 or 10 or 20 plaintiffs like you guys who would have signed on to challenge the activity.
Might have had to take a lottery on the plaintiffs, actually.
Yeah, it was amazing that several of those people in the Senate who are good Christians actually did not want to vote the Bible to be the state book because, as you say, it would have cheapened it.
I think another factor, too, though, was the sort of repercussions in North Carolina. I think economics might have played a factor in that, too, that they started to worry about how it might
Yeah.
affect. Because they did pull that bill on the transgender bathrooms for this year anyway.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. So what does the Bible say about bathrooms according to Ken Ham? I must have missed that in Sunday school.
He was against Target having the transgender people in there, and I haven't really read all the Bible, I have to admit, but I never heard transgender bathroom problems in the Bible before. So.
no,
Yeah. Well, who knows? Maybe Ken Ham found something that I overlooked after 20 years of preaching the Bible.
Yeah.
well, Dan, let me tell you something that he says. He says, this is from his recent blog, he says, the creationists claim ultimately groups like the FFRF aren't fighting against us, this is the church, but against Jesus and his message. He suggested that such groups are made up of lost individuals, like everyone, desperately needing the forgiveness and hope that Jesus offers. So, are we to consider ourselves lost individuals needing forgiveness, needing hope?
It's only when I get lost and don't get back in time, I have to ask my wife to forgive me.
Yeah. Well, I think
I think that's a compliment. I think some of us would rather be lost. If lost means separating yourself from the superstition of the Christian faith, then yeah, I mean, sometimes people accuse me of blasphemy, and I say, really? Thanks for the compliment. I mean, they are assuming that there couldn't possibly be any legitimate grounds for criticizing their God, their Bible, or their Jesus. They're assuming they are taking the high ground and that we are lost, quote unquote, because we are daring to think higher than them. We are daring to actually challenge their precious beliefs.
Yeah.
And if there was a God, and if he's the God of the Bible, then I think we have a moral obligation to denounce such a bully. As you mentioned, Richard Dawkins' famous sentence before, and if Jesus really did exist, he said a couple of good things, but on balance, he was not a very good moral leader. The country would be in really bad shape if we were all to follow the teachings of Jesus. So when somebody like Ken Ham goes against us, then we take that as a compliment. Say, wow, well, thank you. It's really nice to be called a lost individual by somebody like him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one of the things that I've seen occurring, I think, a little more and more recently from theists is that they tell the atheists that they can't judge God based on materialistic principles or on the principles that we really value in this world. That God is somehow above beyond that and an entirely different type of entity that cannot be judged on any sort of basis that we would consider normal.
Yeah, I'd actually like to get into that some later when we get to Dan's book, one of them, Life-Driven Purpose. But one thing I want to get into before we go on too much further is the clergy project. We're having Jerry DeWitt come next month on the, I forgot the date.
15th.
15th.
May 15th.
And so we'd like, if you could, just discuss the clergy project a little bit and tell us a little bit what you know about Jerry DeWitt.
Yeah, Jerry is great. Jerry DeWitt is the real thing. Just like me and like hundreds of other people in this country, Jerry was an ordained, practicing, preaching minister, and he saw the light and he left the faith, and he's now an atheist. And my story is similar, although mine happened a long time ago. I came out of the ministry in 1984. But Jerry, if you can get Jerry to tell you a little bit in his preacher voice, you know, it's really funny. He's a bit self-conscious about it now, but if you could ask him to give a little bit of sermon in his, you know, his Southern gospel preacher voice that he has, is really, you know, really funny. So Jerry called me one day because he was leaving the faith and he didn't know any other ministers who had done such a thing. And what a horrible situation to be in, you can imagine. And so when I and Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins and their associates, Linda Lascola, when we started the Clergy Project, which is kind of like a halfway house community for people like us who used to believe as ministers and don't, well, then Jerry became one of the founding members of that group. And in fact, Jerry, I think, was the very first what we call active member. In other words, he was still preaching in the group, to leave the ministry while he was, leave the pulpit while he was in our group. So he might have been our first, what we call graduate from the church during that time. Now there's more than 650 members. This started in 2011. More than 650, or maybe it's more than that now. I need to call it. We're going to have a board meeting. And about a fourth of them are still in the pulpit, and about 3/4 of us have left. So you can look it up. Just go to clergyproject.org, and it's kind of nice. Here's a new group that you guys don't have to join unless you are a former clergy. But and it's a private online forum where we use pseudonyms to protect their privacy. But there's also a public Facebook page. So if you do want to interact with any of the members of the Clergy Project, some of them volunteer to get involved through the Clergy Project's Facebook page as well.
Are these people who go through this being able to find suitable employment?
Yeah, well, we all have to, basically.
Yeah.
I had to do it. I had to do it on my own long before the Clergy Project, and many of them do find a graceful way. Some of them go into nonprofit work, which is kind of a nice way to do it. They're still doing good works.
Sure.
Some of them teach philosophy, like Delos McCown was a Southern Baptist preacher, and Patrick McGuire was a Roman Catholic priest. They both went into teaching philosophy, which is a good fit. Some of them go into sales, like insurance work, which I think is kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
And then some of them go into social work, like Tom Reed, who was a Mississippi priest, who became a priest because he wanted to help people, and he left the priesthood because he wanted to help people. It was the wrong way to do it.
Yeah.
And so then he went into social work. And so some of them are having a tough time. So we have a hardship fund where we can raise money to help some of them. Like if the church finds out they're an atheist now, they throw them out on the street and change the keys, and what are they going to do? They need to make a living.
Sure.
So and then the Todd Stiefel Foundation gave a nice grant so that we can give transitional employment training, so they can learn how to get a real job in the honest world. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
so that's kind of. But most of the benefit of the clergy project is just for us to talk among ourselves, just so they know that there are others who have gone through it. And what book did you read? How did your family take it? What happened to your marriage? What kind of job did you get? And so on. And some of them have emotional problems. And can you recommend a good secular therapist, for example? Or some of them want marriage counseling, because imagine what that does to a marriage.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a pretty exciting thing, and Jerry will probably tell you more about it. Ask him about that first time he called and we talked on the phone. It was really just fun. He was almost whispering, like, "Can I be talking about this?" So, that was just really. I could tell from his voice that he was real. He's the real thing. He wasn't just faking it. You know what I mean? He was really agonizing and struggling through his intellectual change.
Yeah, he really had a rough time from his book.
Yeah.
It was amazing he made it through.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sort of read a number of things on the web. People who say they're atheists, but they hate to tell their family, or they don't know what to do about it. Their friends, they seem to say they lose friends, etc. So I can imagine it has to be an emotionally wrenching experience for many of these people.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't seem to interact much with people like that anymore.
Well, with my mother, she was a little bit religious, but it's politics I couldn't talk with her about. I have a question for you. Did you ever, this popped up on the web when I was doing some research, the president of Southern Baptist Seminary, Albert Mohler, did you run across what he said about the clergy project back in 2012?
I forget what he said.
Yeah, well, he's saying it was for charlatans and cowards and trying to get publicity. But his rationale was sort of destroyed his whole argument. I expected more from somebody in that position, but basically he said that ministers were struggling honestly with doubts were a different category than the ones in the clergy project, because doubt will lead to one of two inevitable consequences. Faithful doubt leads to deeper embrace of the truth. He didn't put a capital T on it, but that's what he meant. With doubt serving to point us to a deeper knowledge, trust, and understanding of the truth. And then pernicious doubt, he called it, leads to unfaithfulness, unbelief, skepticism, despair. So basically his argument was, if you actually leave the church, then you weren't really Christian anyway. It sounds like his point was, so, which you hear a lot,
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I hear that a lot. If I was a true Christian, I never would have left the faith. But he's ignoring another option, and that is that Christianity is not the truth, and that's even harder to deal with for some of us when we really thought it was. When we thought it was so beautiful and inspiring and motivating and life-changing and salvific and all of that, and we preached it. And then to learn, reluctantly in most cases, that what we were preaching is simply not true, that the Christian message is mainly false. It has some nuggets of truth in it, like all religions do, and like even many secular philosophies do. And that the Bible itself is not a reliable source of knowledge or of morals. And when you've been up there in the pulpit preaching it, then you realize, oh my goodness. So he's very conveniently ignoring the option that what he believes may not actually be true.
yeah.
That reminded me of a fellow contacted me years ago saying he was a skeptical Baptist. So I went to talk with him, and he spent about 2 hours trying to get me to read the Bible, which I kept rejecting as being a valid source. he finally gave up. But it's hard to realize there's another options out there, especially in a closed sort of community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we were called apostates by many people. I have been called an apostate, and again, I take that as a compliment. I mean, they would compliment a Muslim imam becoming an apostate from their religion and rising above it and leaving it for whatever reason. So, and yet they don't want to equally applaud someone like me and Jerry, and other members of the Clergy Project who have done exactly the same thing because they're looking at it from the inside out. So,
Yeah. No, of course, if you're in that situation, you're compelled to believe that you have the truth. I mean, I don't see how you can do otherwise if you're really in this position where you are so involved that you cannot step back and just look dispassionately at the whole situation. You either have to do that and go one way, or else you have to go deeper into it, I think.
Yeah, I found. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that when I was a believer, I would not have said that I was compelled to believe it. I truly believed it. It wasn't like I felt like I was being forced, because I thought salvation was a choice. You make a decision. You open your heart, and I think the problem comes is that we don't really look at it critically. We don't want to look at it critically. Why should we look at it critically when we have this wonderful community of believers and this Word of God that we can read, and then we have, some of us have these great feelings of peace and joy that comes from our faith and all that. So, when I was working on my newest book about the God of the Old Testament, I was shocked at the things that I must have read when I was a preacher, that I must have seen, but I did not see. You know what I mean? There's this kind of a devotional attitude that many believers and many ministers have when they approach the Bible, like it's something different from any other book that you would criticize. And so the warts, it's like when you're in love with somebody. Love is blind, Yeah. I think faith and worship are blind and deaf, because it just totally paints over your ability to look at it. And here, unlike you, Carl, I and Richard Dawkins and others are begging people to please read the Bible. We wish they would read the Bible. I think there'd be a lot more atheists if people actually read the Bible.
Yeah, I know a lot of people that told me that was one reason the main reason they left the church. It's kind of strange to me too. This president of the Southern Baptist Seminary had so little compassion for people who were struggling with doubts and the change of life and all the stress in there. He just it was the old tribal thing that they must be evil, and we aren't worried about how they feel.
Yeah, well, he used the word pernicious, like,
yeah.
Instead of grappling with the actual issues that he says are important and should take seriously, instead he just uses an ad hominem argument to paint a lot of us as, well, you just weren't true believers and you were pernicious, you're evil, you're bad people, which is exactly what the Bible did. The entire Old Testament paints anybody who does not follow that religion as wicked and evil people. In fact, the word wicked and the word evil in the Old Testament especially, and in most of the Bible, most often has nothing to do with morality or ethics or behavior. People are called wicked and evil because they chose another religion. They worshipped idols. They did not obey and bow down to the God. So it's not a moral book. Wicked and evil and morality, there's very little moral teaching in the Bible. Most of it is obedience, submission. Even Saul, when he said that he kept those animals alive so that he could sacrifice them to God, and Samuel said to Saul, well, obedience is better than sacrifice. If you don't obey, if you don't be like this submissive wife to an abusive husband and do everything he says, then you are a wicked, evil person by not obeying, which is a totally upside-down view of human morality.
Yeah, I find it kind of strange that people who claim they're really in support of freedom base their whole sort of view of life on obedience, on a king, and claim they're Americans. Okay. And it seems we have a phone call.
Yeah, we have a phone call here, so we're going to let a caller call in, and we'll see if he wants to talk to you or just make a statement, okay? Hello, caller. You're on Freethought Forum. Do you have a question for our host here?
Yeah, I do. But I would like to start off with a compliment, actually. One of Mr. Barker's songs that I appreciated was The Atheist Blues. I thought that one was pretty good. It is a better song. You could dance a little bit better to it than the one that you played. But the idea I had about the Freethought, the Freedom from Religion Foundation was that it was not necessarily a group of atheists, but a group of people protecting the separation of church and state. And I was sort of getting a different impression of that at the beginning of the show.
Would you like to comment on that, Dan?
Yeah, well, we have two purposes, and our main purpose is the separation of church and state. And in that endeavor, we are often joined by religious people. In fact, many of the plaintiffs in some of our lawsuits are not atheists. They are, liberal Jews or liberal Presbyterians or even some Catholics and other good Christian people who understand the importance of the First Amendment. So that is our main purpose. However, we also serve as a secondary purpose as a kind of an umbrella group for the non-believers. We're not just the ACLU, but we are kind of the ACLU for atheists and agnostics and secular humanists, whatever you call yourself.
Non-believers. Okay. Well, the question I have is, as far as my interest in separation of church and state, would be the taxes. So often I go to a McDonald's or one of the pizza joints or somewhere like that, and there's somebody standing in front of me. As a matter of fact, I saw one minister filling out a form regarding his not having to pay taxes when he bought pizza. And that would seem to me, since it's since a lot of people pay taxes, the freedom from other people not paying taxes would seem to be an appropriate area for somebody like your organization. I have a friend in Colorado, Patrick Murphy, that was spearheading a movement regarding people understanding how much taxes are being lost by churches that have convention centers and their parking lots and all of the other land that goes off of the tax roll because the churches want to operate different businesses and offices.
I think that you actually have, is it still in progress, a suit related to some of that taxing issue, Dan?
Well, yes, but not the way you're talking about it. In fact, we know John Patrick Michael Murphy. He's quite a character, and he did a year-long statewide effort to try to tax churches, and the Catholic Church mounted a huge counter-effort, and he got about 15% of the vote. So the reason why we can't legally complain about the tax exemption of churches is because, and there was a Supreme Court case that tested this question. It was called Walz, W-A-L-Z versus the Tax Commission, is because churches are a small part of a larger group of nonprofits. A church is a nonprofit, 501c3, just like our group is a nonprofit, just like an arts nonprofit or a science nonprofit or an educational nonprofit. All of us are tax exempt. So we cannot accuse the government of playing favorites with religion when religion falls into a broader class of tax-exempt groups. What we can do, and this is what we're talking about, we can police it when there are abuses, and there are many abuses that churches do. For example, there are churches that have 100 members, but they'll pave over 500 parking spaces, so they don't have to pay taxes on it. And in the state of California, they're saying, wait, that's cheating, right? You can only tax exempt. You can only exempt from taxation the property that you're actually using for your ministry.
Well, let me see if I've got you right. I mean, if I understand here, because you're upsetting me. So you're telling me that they have their holy area where they're doing their praying and their kneeling and their genuflecting and such as that, and they get that tax-free, but they also have to have a tax-free place to park their car while they're doing that?
Well, basically, if it's connected with their actual work,
okay.
Just like our organization, any nonprofit, the Red Cross or a soup kitchen or any scientific nonprofit, We are all tax exempt. In other words,
Aren't you tax
if you
exempt
make
under different, educational versus religion versus, different? Aren't there different areas of tax exemption?
well, there's different categories, but there's not different tax exemptions that come into that.
How?
So we can't take that case. It's already been taken to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said we cannot accuse the government of promoting religion when it's giving to churches the same tax exemption that it gives to all other nonprofits. Because what good is a museum, for example, a museum that is promoting arts? It's not really a charity, you wouldn't think, but they're still tax exempt. Our organization falls under educational, and so just like churches, we are also tax exempt. So if you write a donation to us or to your local church, you can deduct that on your taxes at the end of the year because you're giving it to a nonprofit. However, if there are cases of abuse where churches are claiming more or crossing the line, we will complain about that. And
All
we
right.
have a lawsuit right now challenging the unfair IRS provision that allows ministers of the gospel to exclude their housing from income. We think that's unfair. So we're challenging that in court.
Okay, we're going to have to stop right now because it's time for us to do a little break.
Yeah. Thanks for calling in, caller. I think those were very provocative questions, and we hope you call back again. We're going to take a little 2-minute program break here, so we've got about 20 minutes left. So in case you're just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Freethought Forum is funded jointly by them and by individual contributions. Shows are live most Tuesdays 5 to 6 p.m. On Knoxville Community Access Television, Channel 12 or Channel 194, depending upon your local cable network. Tell your out-of-town friends to see us streaming online at ctvknox.org.
Okay, if you notice, it's the call-in show, and we are live today, April 26, 2016. Call in on the number on the screen. And if you have any comments or questions, and call right now. We're doing an informative break. We'll do a little video played, and then we'll come back to the show in just a few minutes.
Yeah.
If you live in or around the Knoxville area and are questioning your religious beliefs or simply believe in one less God than everyone else, well, you're not alone. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people just like you that meets twice a week at a bar or restaurant. We meet every Tuesday night following the show at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria for happy hour. You'll find our group either inside or on the patio. Look for Richard Dawkins' silver-jacketed book, The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. On Fridays, we meet at Agave Azul or the Beard and Beer Market. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. We all question what we believe at one point in our lives. If this is the time for you, come join us for food, drink, conversation, and fun. Do you find stories of talking snakes laughable? Do you prefer the scientific method over supernatural beliefs? Are you concerned about religious leaders and organizations imposing their values and rules on your body, your family, and the rest of our society? Well, take comfort in the fact that you're not alone. The Rationalists of East Tennessee meets weekly for fellowship and provides a forum for people who support skeptical thinking and rational discussion of these and other issues. To find out more information or to find out about our next meeting, visit us on the web at www.rationalist.org.
Okay, well, we're back with FFTV, Freethought TV. The Atheist Society of Knoxville, or ASK, who's one of our sponsors, meets 2 times a week. We have evening meetups for fun, food, drink, conversation. ASK's purpose is to supply a venue for community, camaraderie, and outreach to atheists, agnostics, freethinkers, and other like-minded persons. Our Tuesday meeting is going on right now at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria in the Knoxville Old City.
And the Rationalists of East Tennessee has Sunday activities, lively presentations and discussions on subjects that are timeless sometimes. Last month we had the book club, and this book club for this month, October, is The Devil's Game, How the United States Helped Unleash Fundamentalist Islam by Robert Dreyfuss. Meets Sunday, May 8th at 2 o'clock at Books A Million on Kingston Pike. public's invited. You don't have to read the book, but it often helps. And you can join, look on rationalist.org, just see the rest of the books on the lists. Also, there'll be a National Day of Reason picnic at Tyson Park on Thursday, May 5th, at Pavilion number 1, starting at 4 p.m. with the grills going at 5. And as we mentioned before, on May 15th, we'll have former evangelical preacher Jerry DeWitt speaking at Pellissippi State College, Hardin Valley, Goings Auditorium on how believers can still save the world if it's not already too late.
Yeah, how non-believers can still save the world, right?
Is that what I should have said?
It is it. Okay. Both the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalist of East Tennessee help provide a social outlet where you'll find that if you don't believe in Zeus, Zoroaster, or Yahweh, you are not alone. So let's get back to the program and our interview with Dan Barker.
Okay, Dan, I heard you come back. So I was kind of curious if you had any really, you had so many debates, and if you've had any really outstanding encounters, you might want to mention one. I noticed there was one you mentioned about Peter Hitchens and some outrageous ad hominem accusations, but I don't know if you want to talk about that one or if there are any other ones, but kind of curious.
Well, yeah. So not long after Christopher Hitchens died, I did a debate in Oxford, England. It was a three-person against three-person debate. So I and Michael Shermer, the famous skeptic and author, and the philosopher Peter Milliken, we went up against Joanna Collicutt, who's an Anglican priest, John Lennox, who's a famous mathematician, and Peter Hitchens, who's Christopher Hitchens' brother, who is a believing Anglican Christian. So we did our debate, and in fact, sitting right behind the three of us was Richard Dawkins, because Dawkins lives in Oxford. So we did our debate, and we kind of split the work among the three of us. And then Joanna Collicutt didn't really say much at all. We didn't even take notes. John Lennox was pretty good. He was actually debating the issues. But Peter Hitchens got up and admitted, here he is in a formal debate. We're wearing our tuxedos and bow ties, very British parliamentarian thing. And he said, well, no, the evidence, no, and, the rational argument, but then he turned it into a character attack. He turned over to us atheists sitting on the other side of the room, and he said, what kind of people would actively wish to live in a world that has no purpose and no meaning? Who would choose to live in a universe where you'll never see your loved ones again? What's wrong with people? So, in other words, he didn't debate any of the issues. He basically just spent his whole time in that gorgeous British accent. He sounded like his brother, In fact, I wanted to ask him after the debate, does he think his brother's in hell? But it was too crowded. But anyway, so in fact, I write about that debate in my book, Life-Driven Purpose. And I write about other debates, too, with Dinesh D'Souza and, other opponents. I've done 123 debates now.
Wow.
And so that was disappointing, although a lot of debate opponents actually do grapple with the issues. He did not. He was just using it to bash people. And I didn't have a chance to reply, so in my book, Life-Driven Purpose, which I think you get the joke, it's the opposite of purpose-driven life.
Yeah, I'm showing a copy of it right now.
In my book, Life-Driven Purpose, I actually do respond then in print to Peter Hitchens' remarks, because we were out of time. I didn't have a chance to say any more that night in Oxford.
Yeah. Well, clearly life has meaning. If you want to imbue it with meaning, it will have meaning. It doesn't mean it has some sort of a purpose, a final purpose to it.
Yeah,
But
he really goes into that in this book.
okay. I'm sorry, Dan, I haven't read your book yet.
If you don't mind, I'll read a quote from it. It says, "The meaning of life," in quotes, "never resolves to anything real, but the meaning in life certainly does." And I thought you did a fantastic job in that book of addressing the issue of why there is something instead of nothing. You pretty much just destroyed that whole argument and turned it to nothing practically. So, I don't know if you want to comment on that or not, but I thought that was...
Yeah, well, the good news that we atheists and non-believers offer the world. And this is going to sound weird, but the very good news that we offer is that there is no purpose of life. If there were a purpose of life, that would be horrible. We would be secondary. We would be looking up to some commanding officer to tell us what to do and how to move and how to act. But that doesn't mean there's no purpose in life. And just like that quote you just gave, there's no meaning of life, and that's great news because we can find our own meaning. But there's plenty of purpose and meaning in our lives when there are problems to solve. And you name it. There can be thousands of different types of problems that we all encounter, challenges. Like who would dare say that Elizabeth Cady Stanton, this feminist, atheist pioneer for women's rights, who would dare say that her life did not have any meaning? She was working for women's equality. She was working to solve a problem. And so that gave her life, and she chose to imbue her life with immense meaning and immense purpose. But it's not top-down like a purpose-driven life. It's bottom-up, like the title of my book says. It's life-driven purpose.
Yes, exactly.
Go ahead.
I agree with you entirely. I mean, I in fact find people who are to be rather sad who think that there is no meaning in their life except that they can live forever. I mean, that makes no sense to me at all.
Yeah, I think you briefly mentioned it. I have a copy of all your other books here, but I don't have the most recent one. God, the most.
God,
yeah.
the God book, yeah.
Yes. You want to comment on that a little bit?
Yeah. So, this was an accidental book. I was in the middle of finishing Life-Driven Purpose, which is published by Pitchstone, when Richard Dawkins, and I think most of your listeners know who Richard Dawkins is,
I hope so.
the famous biologist and probably the world's leading atheist right now. He sent me an email saying that he wanted to defend himself against the critiques of one sentence that he wrote in the book, The God Delusion. The first sentence in chapter 2, where Richard Dawkins says, the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. And I actually just said that from memory because
I was impressed.
I was very impressed, I have to say.
So he wanted to make a keynote diagram that you put up on the screen, where you could click on any one of those 19 nasty adjectives, like genocidal, or you could click on ethnic cleanser, for example, and then out would pop the Bible verses that prove that he was right. They're like, for example, you shall drive out all the inhabitants from the lands, for I have given you the land to possess. If that's not ethnic cleansing, I don't know what is. So we were going back and forth with emails, and I was just trying to help him, make his keynote slide. And right in the middle of it, after we came up with more than 1,500 passages, way too many for a slide, way too many. Richard Dawkins suggested, you know what, this would make a good book. And Annie Laurie read that email and she said, hell yeah, this would make a great book. So the book, so I basically took the research and put one chapter for each of those. So the first 19 chapters of the book are all of those words that you just heard. And so the book is called God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction. But when I was working on it, I discovered some adjectives that he overlooked. Or maybe he didn't overlook them. Maybe 19 was enough, So part one of the book is the 19 chapters. Part one is called Dawkins Was Right. Part two of the book is called Dawkins Was Too Kind. And I came up with 8 more chapters, pyromaniacal and merciless and angry and aborticidal and slavemonger, curse-hurling, vaxicidal. You know what that word is, vaxicide?
No, I don't.
Well, technically, it's the killing of cows, like vaccine we get from cows. But the killing of animals, basically. So there's all those chapters, and then, of course, what are Christians going to say? Christians are going to say you shouldn't judge the entire Bible by the Old Testament alone. And they're right, if you're going to judge the entire Old and New Testament. So I end with a final chapter called What About Jesus? Was Jesus better than the God of the Old Testament? And so that's kind of the origin of the birth of this accidental book. And just yesterday, it became an audio book.
Ah.
So it's doing really well, not just in atheism, but it's also surprisingly selling well in the category of Bible criticism and interpretation, which really that makes me smile because people are going to they're going to look up good books on Bible criticism, and then they see this book there, which is nice. So,
Yeah.
And now we just finished the audio book, which is available last night.
Oh, good.
Great.
Good to get caught up to date on that. So, yeah, I'm glad you wrote that one, Ed. We were speculating that the title had to do with Dawkins' quote. I mean, the book.
Yeah.
We weren't sure.
Well, you probably saw if you look online, and the publishers did a great job. At the top of the book, in big letters, is foreword by Richard Dawkins.
Yeah.
And then there's the title of the book, and then down at the bottom is by Dan Barker. So obviously Richard Dawkins' name is going to sell books because he has earned the right as a respected scientist. He's not just some angry person, who has some philosophical ideas. He has really earned his place in the world as a thinker, and that's fine with me because the book was his idea, and the book was his basic sentence. So it's perfect how it all came together. And don't let anyone tell you that the God of the Bible is worthy of our respect or admiration. If they say that, they've never read the Bible, and most people don't. Most people don't read the book. So Dawkins and I, and you I'm sure as well, we are begging people, please, read the Bible. Read what it says, and then tell me if you can respect and admire that bully, that monster that's in those pages.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people who are caught up in religion will tend to sort of gloss over those. I think you were talking before about, taking things that agreed with your preconceptions and sort of submerging ideas that didn't. And so when people read through the Bibles, they just go along and say, oh, yeah, well, God told the Jews to kill the Canaanites, etc. But then they go on. They don't bother to think of what it really means.
Yeah, well, it's because it's like when you're a devoted fan or family member, there's this blind spot that happens. You become so attached to your faith, and you have these dogma. God is good, right? That's just a dogma that has to be true. Therefore, the whole Bible is good, and there's uncomfortable parts. Well, the experts can explain that. But how do you explain rape? How can you explain away the fact that the God of the Old Testament, in many places, especially like in Jeremiah 13, actually threatened the rape of Israelite women and took credit for it? Yeah. He says, when the Babylonians come and lift up your skirts and you are sexually assaulted, I, the Lord, am lifting up your skirts. Yeah. The God of the Bible says he is raping those women. So what kind of context or metaphor would excuse such horrible sexist language?
No, there is none. I agree, but once people get into that mindset that everything in the Bible is good and true, and it's the product of God, and God is good, it's hard to get them out of that.
I'm always just amazed that people claim, well, they just want to look at the New Testament when it's all supposed to be by the same God and the same tradition. It's just sort of a bizarre way of trying to cover up sources of the whole religion.
Yeah, and so I don't. Jesus said he did not come to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. And if you read deeply into what the New Testament says, Dan's right. He's not really that good a guy when you get right down to it.
Since we're getting short on time, I didn't want to leave without mentioning Dan's musical abilities. You like jazz. You play a lot of jazz. And you're in a jazz band. Is that correct?
jazz combos mostly, some big bands here in Madison, Wisconsin, and then a lot of piano solo.
And then I didn't realize until I was sort of looking over the website again that you wrote some music for Julia Sweeney's productions.
Yeah, her movie Letting Go of God. It's just a little tiny part. I gave her about 50 different things, and she took one of them and she put it in her movie. So, if you hear the little piano part where Julia is saying goodbye to God and God has packed his bags and he's on the front porch, it was good while it lasted, but we have to say goodbye. You know, when you hear that little music part, well, that's me playing the piano.
And then you did a lot of music in your Christian days with Pat Boone. You accompanied, and some other well-known names during your.
Yeah, well, I played for Pat Boone just once in Arizona, and that was fun. We met backstage, and then he had his white patent leather shoes, but I played for a lot of people, the Lawrence Welk Show people, and then I wrote a bunch of Christian music that is still selling. I'm still getting royalties even today from
really? Wow.
from that stuff that was produced back in the 1970s, which is kind of fun.
And then I also want to mention that you've written children's books. I happen to have one of them with me. We had the Just Pretend, Maybe Right, Maybe Wrong, and can't pull up the name of the other one.
Maybe yes, maybe no.
Maybe yes, maybe no. I can't want to say that wrong. And Maybe Right, Maybe Wrong was it the other one? And we actually let them to school. And then there's one I have here, Just Pretend, which is apparently a really old edition because it's not the one that comes up online, the same cover. A freethought book for children about gods and the concept of gods. And you also kind of maintain computer stuff there, so just a very Renaissance man in a way, I guess. As far as winding up, there any things you'd like to tell us about that we haven't covered in the show?
Well, since the Freedom from Religion Foundation, we're a membership organization, and of course, we would like to get to 25,000 members soon. If you support the idea of keeping religion and government separate, you're welcome to join our group. But even if you don't join, if you would help us by keeping your eyes and ears open, one of our new mottos now is, if you see something, say something. So if you see a Christian cross on the back of a police car, or if they're starting to pray before school board meetings, or if a teacher of your student is pushing creationism in the schools, or if the Ten Commandments monument is up on the wall of your kindergarten class, if you see anything like that looks like the government is promoting religion, then contact us. We have a staff of 7 attorneys who are eager and willing and ready, and they've got the tools, and they can get a letter out really, really quick. And we can keep you anonymous if you want. If you don't want your name used, we can just write on behalf of a concerned resident.
Okay, well, I think that's an excellent comment. We will do that, and so thank you very much, Dan, for being on the show today. It was great having you.
Thank you.
And it's hope we'll get you down here sometime to talk to us in person.
Okay. Well, we'd like to thank our viewers and send our thanks to Sam for technical support and to staff at CTV, KNOX, and to all our callers.
Also, you can see this show on Tuesdays from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time. This is Knoxville Station. On this Knoxville Station, 21 hours Greenwich Mean Time, ctvknox.org.
Okay, so see you next time.